Hello and welcome to another edition of the Middle East Report. In this programme we'll be discussing the meaning and the significance of political Zionism and what it means today for Israel and the Jewish people. We'll also be discussing the great news that Gilad Schalit is now home with his parents, Noam and Aviva, after 5.5 years in captivity, held in solitary confinement by Hamas. In exchange for Gilad's release, Israel has released over 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. More than half of them have been involved in terrorism against Israel. And we're looking at the implications of this deal for Israel's security and what this means for Israel. And my special guest for today's programme is Alex Ryvchin of the Zionist Federation, also an author for the JewishThinker.org. Alex, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me.
And I know from your accent you're an Australian by background. So can you tell us something about your background, your Jewish faith, and how you ended up here being a spokesman for the Zionist Federation?
Let me start at the beginning, I guess. I was born in Kiev in what was then the Soviet Union. To Jewish parents, and I come from a long line of Soviet and Russian Jews. My family migrated when I was 3 years old. Basically, they understood that in the anti-Semitic context in which they lived, my brother and I would never have sort of adequate opportunities to excel. So we were fortunately taken in as refugees by Australia. And that's where I was raised and educated, and that's where I've lived pretty much my whole life, apart from the last 3.5 years, which I've spent in this fine country. And I guess it was from those early roots and from the history of my parents and what they went through and the anti-Semitism that they faced that gave me an acute awareness of who I am as a Jew, the significance of that, and also the importance of a Jewish state. I remember hearing from my parents when I was old enough to sort of understand the circumstances in which they left and the reasons for why they left. The fact that despite having this unbroken lineage to the Soviet Union, our nationality was still stated as Jewish on our passports. And I remember one story in particular my dad told me. He was a teacher in mathematics and physics and very highly respected. And when his students found out that he was a Jew, they came to him and said, "We can't believe this, but you're such a good person." And it was just that story in particular stayed with me and gave me that real understanding of how ingrained and inherent anti-Semitism was in the Soviet Union. And I guess from there I've always had an interest in Jewish matters and the Jewish state. And that led me to activism on behalf of the Zionist Federation.
That's good. And can you tell us something about Zionism? What does Zionist mean? Because it's a word that's so misunderstood, particularly now. It's almost degraded as a word, and it's often used as almost as a swear word.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. It's been mischaracterized and demonized to the point that it's a word of curse. But all Zionism is the national movement of the Jewish people, and the aspiration to unite the Jewish people in their ancestral home. That is the extent of Zionism. And in fact, it's no different to the national movements of any other people. To look at where Zionism originates from, for as long as the Jews have been separated from Jerusalem and the Holy Land, there's been that yearning to return. But as we understand it today, in its modern form, it takes its roots from a man called Theodor Herzl. And Herzl is a remarkable historical figure because he was a highly assimilated, very well educated, very middle class Viennese Jew who didn't have a lot of concern for Jewish issues. He always felt that with assimilation, the host nation would then sort of reward that and reward that loyalty, and there would be no anti-Semitism. And Herzl was deployed to Paris. He was a journalist to cover a very famous trial at the time, which was the trial of Captain Alfred Dreyfus. Now, Dreyfus was a decorated soldier in the French army, and he'd been accused of passing military secrets to the Germans. And Herzl was covering this trial, and he saw that rather than being tried on the facts of the case in this very developed legal system of the French. The central issue of the case became whether a Jew could truly be loyal to France, given his Jewish nature. And Herzl saw this and was appalled, and he saw baying mobs outside the courtroom chanting death to Jews, and that completely transformed his understanding of how the Jews could live in a free way. And he abandoned that view that through assimilation would come acceptance. And from there he started what we now refer to as the World Zionist Organization and the modern incarnation of secular Zionism. And that culminated ultimately in the formation of the Jewish state Israel in 1948. But I suppose tragically it took the Holocaust as well to definitively prove that hypothesis. The fact that the Jews could never be truly safe and could never be truly free unless they were in their own state. So that's why Israel is so important today to the Jews, because aside from being a return to that ancestral home with which the Jewish people have always had a profound connection, it is that sanctuary. It ensures that never again will the horrors of the past be repeated.
And what does it mean today? What does Zionism mean today for the Jewish people, and how vital is this as a political ideology for the survival not only of Israel but also for the Jewish people?
Well, with the creation of the Jewish state, that may have appeared at the time as the culmination of the Zionist movement, the ultimate success. But today we're in very, very challenging times. Israel and Zionism are highly demonized. They face a relentless barrage of delegitimization. We see calls for sanctions, calls for boycotts of Jewish products, cultural programs, academics. It's unrelenting. It's in the UN, it's in the global media, it's in university campuses, it's everywhere. And so the Zionist movement is very, very important today because it's the voice of Israel. It's the global voice of Israel. And that really is ultimately very, very important because we see still in a post-Holocaust world that the Jews remain under threat around the world. And it is that Zionist movement that ensures that there is that vibrant homeland which will always take the Jews in a time of need.
We have a clip to go to now. This is produced by the Zionist Federation. It looks at the challenges facing the Jewish community here and also the challenges that Israel are currently facing, and also explains the great work that the Zionist Federation is doing to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment in this country.
The Israeli forces went to the most incredible lengths in Gaza to protect human life.
We are in dark times. I have never known the political scene to be more anti-Israel or the pro-Palestinian lobby to be more active.
In the face of unprecedented anti-Israel propaganda, the Zionist Federation is leading the fight against increasingly extreme bias.
The boycott lobby, very sadly, has been very active in Northern Ireland.
I am deeply concerned that Israel so seldom gets fair treatment in media in this country.
It is wonderful and unusual to have so many people here all at one time coming to actually lobby MPs to support Israel.
What the Zionist Federation is trying to do is to present a more realistic and truer face of Israel and to counter the lies and distortions that are currently taking place.
It's always been difficult to get Israel's message across to parliamentarians here in Westminster, and what ZF is doing here today is really important.
This achievement highlights the benefits of the Zionist Federation's many partnerships outside the Jewish community.
Israel is under attack, and it's here in the UK and its influence within Europe that actually the defence has to be mounted, and we have to confront it, and we need to do that together.
The Zionist Federation, or ZF, was involved in the creation and development of the State of Israel. Today, it's a frontline guardian against a tide of one-sided condemnation.
As the largest grassroots pro-Israel activist organisation in the UK, we organise effective demonstrations at short notice when needed.
The ZF is Israel's most prominent voice in the UK and the only organisation offering specialist media training to Jewish and non-Jewish spokespeople.
go now to Keith Fraser. He's a spokesman from the Zionist Federation.
The spokesperson for the Zionist Federation.
On China Radio International.
Sophie Blogrand, spokesperson with the Zionist Federation.
Paul Charney is spokesman for the Zionist Federation. He's with us now. Good evening, Paul.
One of the organisation's current challenges is to tackle the rising hostility towards Israel at British universities.
I think people often underestimate the current climate students face on campus. Jewish students are facing a torrent of anti-Israel rhetoric across the country.
Through a variety of sixth form and university programmes, the ZF helps young activists reach more than 6,000 students every year and brings inspirational speakers and musicians from Israel to their university campuses.
We just have to follow the line that, Israel is bad, the occupation is bad, and this is how we want to cover the conflict. Please don't confuse us with the facts.
The Zionist Federation provided me with two vital speakers. Both speakers were enormously important in combating often the misconceptions people have towards the State of Israel.
Working with schools across the country, the ZF creates unique events, such as science days with top Israeli scientists. These dynamic projects engage over 2,000 sixth formers, the majority of whom are not Jewish.
I believe that if the ZF is able to re-educate people about the historical context of the situation in Israel, people will lend a much greater degree of support to Israel and its case.
The main aim of the organisation is to build a better understanding of Israel in all its diversity. To this end, it will hold 120 educational and cultural events throughout the year.
The work that they're doing on all domains changes the way Israel and the Jewish community is perceived, and I'm proud as an ambassador to have the Zionist Federation.
In a pioneering bid to bring Israeli culture to a wider UK public, the ZF recently took Israel's triple platinum selling artist Idan Reichel on tour to 4 of the UK's largest universities.
The project is known by introducing to the younger audience the other faces of the Israeli society. And this is basically what we're trying to do, and we really appreciate the support of making this tour happen.
At our university, at our campus, you get a lot of people campaigning against Israel. It's interesting to see a more cultural side of it tonight.
The Zionist Federation has enormous impact on university campuses.
ZF does what it says, it's out there and gets the message across very well.
There's never been a more important time for us to increase the range of activities in order to reach an even wider audience. So please help us achieve that objective. Please support us.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Alex, you just discussed earlier the importance and significance of Zionism. Now, it seems to me that the older version or the more traditional version of anti-Semitism characterized the Jewish person as being greedy, money-grabbing, and hungry for power, and also sinister. But we've seen a change in recent years where the anti-Semitism has really changed. It's now attacking Israel on an international level. Can you explain this new form of anti-Semitism and why it's so deadly?
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that the focus has certainly shifted from the Jews to now Israel and Zionism. But I think that the underlying current of anti-Semitism is still there, and it's very much the same. So that same slander, those same accusations that you mentioned, I think are still there, but they're now applied to Israel and to Zionism. So in the past, one could freely say death to Jews, but now that's uncouth in a post-Holocaust world, that people can shout from the rooftops death to Israel. Whereas in the past, the Jews would be accused of partaking in a global conspiracy and controlling everything. Now it's the Zionists that do it. So I think that the slander is the same, but it's evolved, it's matured. I think it's adapted to a post-Holocaust world, but I think the accusations are still very much there. And also, given that a lot of the anti-Israel and anti-Zionist rhetoric now comes from the left, and given the left's position, the position they like to portray of themselves as standing on the side of human dignity and equality and those concepts, they can't come out and then blatantly attack the Jews. So they now use Zionism and Israel as the popular vehicles to continue that attack. But I think that ultimately those same sentiments, those same accusations are there. There was an article in a Swedish paper a few years ago which had accused Israeli soldiers of harvesting, intentionally killing Palestinian youths and then harvesting their organs. Now, that is classic blood libel. It's an accusation which goes back to the Middle Ages of Jews killing Christian children to partake in Passover rituals. So that slander remains, but it's now adapted. And by using Zionism and Israel, that slander is now cloaked in this legitimate language of politics, and it allows these people to stand beyond reproach.
So where does the left get its ammunition from? I mean, the far left in its hatred, where does this hatred stem from? Anyone who goes to Israel becomes obvious that Israel is an open, a free, democratic society where Arab politicians can be elected to the Israeli parliament. You even have the Bedouins serving in the Israeli army, and that Israel is a liberal democracy. In many regards, the left in Israel is very, very strong and would have association with the far left in Britain and Europe. So where does this hatred of Israel and the Jewish people come from?
I agree entirely, Simon. It's quite uncanny because the left, as I said, is seen to stand on the side of equality and human dignity. And in Israel, that's displayed to an incredible extent. I mean, Arabs there have the highest standard of living anywhere in the Arab world. We hear this slander from the left these days of Israel being an apartheid state, which is not only deeply offensive to people who actually suffered under apartheid regimes, but it's patently incorrect. I mean, you have an Arab serving on the Supreme Court, you have Arab members of the Knesset. It's the most maligned and incorrect accusation that has been levelled of late, but it's one that the left uses. And in terms of where this comes from, where this hatred stems from, I think partly these are sentiments that have always been there in the extreme left. If you look at sort of the progressive thinkers of the left going back many, many years, whether Karl Marx or Voltaire, they've always exhibited very anti-Semitic sentiments. They've always viewed the Jews as being connected with money, with greed, with capitalism, and those are the exact things that the left is against. But as I said, they can't now attack the Jews in a direct way because that goes against that new modern sort of leftist ethos. So that attack is now continued, but it's now continued on Israel and the Zionist movement, but in the exact same way, in the same movements. Also, I think the left, they naturally try and see an aggressor and an oppressed in every conflict, and they will naturally try and lend their support to that oppressed. And there's a perception, which is partly fueled by the media, that Israel is an aggressor, that it is aided by America or even manipulates America to an extent, and that the Palestinians are the victims in this conflict, and that they, with events like suicide bombing, that shows the left, they take that to be a sign of the inherent weakness of the Palestinian movement compared with the vastly militarized Israeli state. But in fact, the reality is very, very far from that. I mean, Israel, since its creation, has fought 3 wars of annihilation, not of its choosing, in 48, 67, and 73. Israel is a tiny, tiny state in an extremely hostile region. So I think that the left have it entirely wrong as to who the strong party is in this conflict and who the weak one is. But I think it's the classic anti-Semitism and also that modern tendency to side with the perceived weaker party that fuels the leftist hatred of Zionism in Israel.
And certainly the left-wing intelligentsia is having huge implications and impact on schools and universities, even at the UN. Are we finding a situation now where Israel is finding herself even more politically and diplomatically isolated when Israel is doing everything she can to make peace, and yet the very people that she wants to make peace with don't recognise her right to exist, and secondly, like Hamas and Hezbollah, call for the genocide of the Jewish people and the destruction of the State of Israel. And isn't it critical for the freedom of the West that the West backs Israel in this war against Islamic extremism?
Yeah, I agree with that. The left, the intelligentsia, as you say, have managed to cast Israel as being an occupying power. They've managed to create this